There's a certain kind of silence that wraps around you when you live alone. Not the lonely kind, no, the kind that feels like freedom. That was my life at 32. My name's Madeline Carter, and I lived in apartment 2B of a weathered old brick building just a few blocks from downtown. It wasn't glamorous, no doorman, no rooftop pool, just creaky stairs, chipped paint, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. But inside my little apartment, it was mine. Every square inch, every color, every shelf and light fixture. I designed it all, with secondhand furniture, thrift store rugs, and handmade art from clients who couldn't pay cash but had talent worth more than gold. The world saw cheap. I saw character. I wasn't poor. Far from it. As a freelance interior designer, I had enough high-end clients and remote projects to live comfortably. I just didn't feel the need to prove anything. I valued peace over prestige, and if that made me weird, so be it. That was before Vanessa Simmons walked into my life, or rather, into my apartment. Vanessa lived upstairs in Unit 3A. She was the type of woman who wore heels to walk her dog and carried designer handbags like they were oxygen. Platinum blonde hair, expensive perfume, perfectly curated Instagram stories. We didn't talk much, just polite nods in the hallway. Until the day her phone died in the lobby, and she asked to come in and charge it. I said yes, of course. I'm not rude. She sat on my rattan chair, sipping from the glass of water I offered her, eyeing my living space with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she said it, with a chuckle, almost like she was sharing an inside joke. Your place smells like artistic poverty. You know, broke but with candles. It took me a second to process what she'd just said. I smiled politely, pretending not to care. But inside, something sunk deep. Not just because of the words, but because of what they reminded me of. My family. They never understood me. Not when I dropped out of a corporate design job to work freelance. Not when I turned down a stable salary for the chaos of creative freedom. My younger sister Lily was the family's golden girl. A doctor, engaged, perfectly dressed at every Thanksgiving dinner. Me? I was the artsy one they called when they needed help picking out curtains. But never when they discussed inheritance or respect. That night, I sat on my floor, knees hugged to my chest, the flicker of my handmade soy candles casting soft shadows on the wall. I stared at the bookshelf I'd built from reclaimed wood, the plants I'd nursed back to life, the framed sketches from students I'd mentored. Was this really poverty? Or was it something she, and maybe my own family, couldn't understand? That was the night something in me shifted. Quietly. No rage, no loud declarations. Just a whisper. Let them laugh, but make sure they live to regret it. The comment Vanessa made echoed in my mind for days. Not because I cared about her opinion. God knows I'd met women like her in college, in galleries, in every overpriced brunch spot downtown. It was what came after that hurt more. That weekend was Sunday dinner at my parents' house, a Carter family tradition I hadn't missed in years, mostly because I knew skipping it would be seen as another one of Madeline's dramatic phases. We gathered around my mother's farmhouse-style dining table, ironically, a style I helped her design. And as usual, I brought a homemade lemon tart and a bottle of mid-range wine. Lily arrived fashionably late, still in her scrubs, as if to subtly remind us that she was saving lives while the rest of us existed. My father was halfway through a story about one of Lily's surgeries when my mother casually interrupted. Vanessa mentioned she stopped by your place this week. She says it has a bohemian charm, she said, air quoting the phrase with a smirk. Lily giggled, not even hiding it. She said it smelled like candles and wood glue. Very Madeline. Well, my mother added, you've always had that creative touch, though sometimes I wish you'd use it in a real home. My fork paused midair. I smiled, lips tight. They didn't even realize they were doing it. Or maybe they did. I was used to these digs. When Lily got into med school, the family threw a celebration dinner with guests, speeches, a custom cake. When I signed my first full-time client for my own interior design business, my mom said, "That's nice, just don't let it distract you from finding a real job someday." I'd learned to tuck the sting somewhere deep. But tonight, After Vanessa, after the weight of that insult lingering like smoke in my chest, it hit harder. "So, Maddie," Lily said, swirling her wine, "how's the candle and curtain empire going?" "Doing well," I said calmly. "I just finished a condo project in Beacon Hill. The client wired me the full payment up front." "Oh?" Mom raised an eyebrow. "So you can afford a real apartment now?" Laughter. That kind that sounds light on the outside, but slices on the inside. I sat back and looked at them, my family, the people who'd helped Lily with the down payment on her condo, who financed her study abroad year in Paris. Me? I was told to learn independence. When I asked for help paying tuition at design school, they said, "We're already helping Lily. You're the artistic one. You'll figure it out." And I did. I worked nights at a furniture store, taught myself AutoCAD from YouTube, took on free projects to build a portfolio, and eventually became the designer brands hired when they wanted something fresh and grounded. But to my family, I was still the candle girl. The next morning, I woke up in my quiet little apartment. The light streamed in through the gauze curtains I'd sewn myself. There was no applause, no recognition, but I felt something new, a slow, deliberate kind of fire. They think I'm just surviving? Good. Let them think that. They don't need to see me coming. Later that day, I sat on my couch, hand-me-down cushions and all, and opened my laptop. I remembered something I'd seen online a few months ago. A private real estate listing. The building I lived in had been quietly listed for sale by the aging landlord who owned it, and a few others in the city. Back then, I'd dismissed it. But now it felt like fate handing me a loaded weapon wrapped in a silk glove. I pulled up the listing again. The price was high, but not impossible, especially not for someone who'd saved smart, invested early in crypto, and kept her spending minimal while working with high-end clients. I wasn't rich, but I was ready. And this time, I wasn't designing a room. I was designing a reckoning. For the next 2 nights, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious. No, because for the first time in a long time, I was awake. I'd spent years designing homes for other people, listening to their needs, their dreams, their overpriced taste. I'd walked into penthouses where the view was worth more than everything I owned. I'd staged beachfront properties, townhomes in gated communities, and even a former celebrity chef's modern loft that reeked of truffle oil and ego. And through it all, I was invisible. The help, the quirky designer who made things look pretty. No one ever asked how I got there, how many jobs I juggled to finish school, how many nights I skipped meals to buy rendering software, how many landlords gave me that look when I applied for a lease with a freelance income. But I remembered. I remembered being 22, fresh out of a community college with a portfolio I'd made on printer paper and ambition alone. I remembered the interview where a firm's creative director said, "You've got potential, but you just don't have the polish. Come back when you've interned somewhere real." Except I couldn't afford to intern. Unpaid internships don't pay rent. So I built my own way. I started by offering to redesign friends' apartments for free, took before and after shots with my old iPhone 6, wrote blog posts, created DIY reels. Slowly, I got noticed. A small article in a local lifestyle site led to a boutique hotel asking me to revamp 2 rooms. They couldn't pay much, but the exposure brought 3 new clients. And I saved. Every damn dollar. No new car, no luxury bags, no vacations to Tulum or Paris. My designer friends thought I was nuts. "You've got to look successful to be successful," they'd say. But I wasn't trying to look successful. I was trying to own something. And now, as I stared at the real estate listing for my building, I realized I could. The asking price was just under $2.3 million. It sounded like a lot, but the property included 8 rental units, all fully leased, all underpriced for the area. The landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Dalton, was trying to offload it quietly. No bidding war, no agents, just a clean transaction with someone who wouldn't turn it into a short-term rental nightmare. I knew I couldn't buy it outright, but I had $410,000 saved. Between a Roth IRA I'd started at 24, a crypto wallet that had exploded in value in 2020, and several solid investments in a women-led tech fund, I was better off than most people thought. I also had steady income, a growing client base, and a squeaky clean credit score. So I made two calls, one to my accountant and one to a real estate lawyer I once helped furnish a lakeside cabin for. Both were stunned, at first. Then came the silence, that pause where people reassess everything they assumed about you. Madeline, my lawyer said, "Are you really doing this?" "No," I replied. "I've already done it. I just need your help with the paperwork." We met the next morning at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. I brought every financial document I had. He reviewed it carefully, then looked up and smiled. "You're ready, and frankly, you're brilliant." For the next 2 weeks, we moved in silence. No announcements, no social media hints, just signatures, bank transfers, and long nights reviewing lease agreements. By the third week, the deal was done. I was now the owner of the building where Vanessa Simmons and my sister Lily lived, the same building where they whispered about my candles and laughed at my curtains, where my family dismissed my hobby as a phase. They didn't know. Not yet. And I wasn't going to tell them, not until I rewrote the rules, not until the next rent cycle began, not until they learned, on paper, in ink, what it felt like to underestimate someone who doesn't need to shout to be powerful. I sat on my floor that night, just like I had a week ago. Same candles, same creaky floor, same city noise drifting through the window. But something was different. This time I didn't feel small. This time, I felt like the storm they didn't see coming. The day the sale officially closed, I walked through the front door of my own building with keys not just to my apartment, but to every apartment. It was surreal. The mailboxes, the stairwell I'd climbed 1,000 times, the lobby with its outdated tiles and flickering light. It was all mine. I didn't strut. I didn't post. I simply stood there, hand grazing the banister, and breathed in the musty, familiar scent of old wood and quiet vengeance. This building once held their judgment. Now, it holds my name. Over the next few days, I worked quietly behind the scenes. I hired a property management company I trusted, small, woman-owned, discreet. We met at a coffee shop and I laid out exactly how I wanted things handled. Lease reviews on all current tenants, noise complaints logged and enforced, unauthorized subleases revoked, rent adjusted to match market rates, with clear 60-day written notice as required by law. But there was one key difference. I wasn't here to be cruel. I was here to be fair, but unapologetically precise. See, while some tenants were lovely, responsible people just trying to get by, others had turned this place into a playground of entitlement, and two of them were at the top of the list: Vanessa Simmons and Lily Carter, my sister. Vanessa had been quietly subletting her unit on weekends to Instagram influencers who used it for photo shoots, violating every clause in her lease. Lily, on the other hand, had used our parents' name to sign her lease under their credit and had made multiple late payments without penalty, thanks to her personal friendship with the old landlord's niece. All that was about to change. I reviewed every lease personally, highlighted every violation, then sat with my property manager to draft the notices. They were professional, polite, but firm. Notice of lease adjustment. Unit 3A. Due to multiple documented violations, including unauthorized subletting and late-night noise complaints, your current lease will not be renewed under existing terms. A new lease offer is available at updated market rate, $4,950 month, previous $1,650. Response required within 30 days. Notice of lease review. Unit 2C. Please provide updated credit and income verification to qualify for your continued occupancy. Per updated policy, co-signers must reside in-state and be financially active participants. New monthly rate, $4,350 month. Previous, $1,400. I knew what would happen. Vanessa would explode. Lily would call Mom. Mom would call me. But they wouldn't get the reaction they expected. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. I also made one more decision. Something that had been on my mind since the moment I signed those papers. There was an old storage unit on the rooftop level, just beneath the maintenance hatch. I had the lock changed and began quietly converting it into something else. My own studio. a place for me to design, to create, to breathe without judgment, where no one could tell me I wasn't enough. And every time I walked past the other apartments, hearing laughter or music or the occasional slammed door, I smiled. Because they had no idea. They were still living in a world where Madeline Carter was the candle girl, the artsy one, the one with boho broke charm. They didn't know the truth yet, but they would. One afternoon, as I was walking out with fabric samples in one hand and my iced coffee in the other, I passed Vanessa in the hallway. She was wearing a full workout set, Lululemon of course, and barking at someone over speakerphone. "What do you mean my rent is going up $3,000? That has to be illegal. Get me the number of the landlord. I want to speak to her directly." She saw me and rolled her eyes like always. "Hi, Maddie," she said flatly, walking past. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, because she'd find out soon enough. Not from gossip, not from a boy, not even from me. She'd find out when the envelope hit her mailbox. Signed at the bottom, in clean ink, Madeline Carter, owner. It didn't take long. 3 days after the notices went out, I heard the first bang on the door of the property management office, a small glass space tucked between the mailroom and the laundry. I was inside with Sarah, the manager I'd hired, going over electrical inspection reports, when the door burst open. Vanessa Simmons, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, holding her phone like a weapon, and already mid-sentence. "This is harassment. I'm not paying triple rent just because someone got greedy." Sarah stood up calmly. "Miss Simmons, please lower your voice. You're welcome to respond to the lease notice in writing or—" "No, no, no," Vanessa snapped. "You don't get it. I want to speak to the landlord, the person who actually thinks they can pull this crap." I sipped my coffee and stayed quiet. Vanessa hadn't seen me yet. I was sitting in the corner, behind a divider, half hidden by a stack of folders and mood boards. But I watched her, studied her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel intimidated by her energy. It felt small, like watching a glittery balloon lose air. Sarah glanced at me. I nodded. She stepped aside. I stood. Vanessa's face morphed from fury to confusion, to something dangerously close to fear. "Wait, you?" She blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I own the building," I said, calm and even. "So technically, I live everywhere now." For a moment, she just stared at me. The silence was heavy. Then came the venom. "This is some kind of joke, right? You? You live in that little apartment with all the candles and weird chairs and, string lights?" "Still do," I said. "Just now I also happen to own the one above yours, and the 5 others on this side of the building." She scoffed. "You can't just decide to triple my rent." "I didn't decide. The market did. You've been underpaying for 3 years. Also, you violated your lease in multiple ways." "Because I let a friend crash for a weekend? Because you turned your unit into a photo studio, hosted unregistered guests, and broke noise regulations 7 times in 2 months. We have it all documented." She opened her mouth again, then closed it. And when she left, it wasn't with the stomp of outrage I expected. It was slower, heavier, because she finally understood this wasn't about candles anymore. 2 hours later, it was Lily. I'd barely stepped back into my apartment when my phone buzzed with her name. I didn't answer. A minute later, my mom called. Of course. "Madeline," Mom said, the second I picked up. "What on earth are you doing?" "Enforcing contracts," I said. "Your sister is in tears. She says you're evicting her." "I'm not. She can stay, if she meets the lease requirements like everyone else." "But we co-signed her lease, and your father's credit was used," "which violates the updated policy requiring in-state co-signers and updated income documentation." "You used a loophole." I closed it. There was a pause. Then the voice I knew too well, the one layered in guilt and control. "You're punishing your family over some old jealousy. Is that it? Because we supported Lily more than you?" I could feel my hand clenching the phone tighter. "No," I said softly. "You're being punished by your own expectations. You raised me to be independent. You just never expected I'd succeed without your approval." "This is ridiculous." "No," I said again, firmer this time. What's ridiculous is being laughed at in my own home, dismissed at my own dinner table, and treated like a child by people who never knew what I was building. You don't have to like it. You just have to pay rent on time. Whispers have a way of traveling through old buildings, faster than light, sharper than truth. By Monday morning, they had begun. In the laundry room, in the lobby, in quiet murmurs behind barely cracked doors. Did you hear? The candle girl owns the building now. No way. You mean the one with the funky little couch and incense sticks? Apparently, she bought the whole place. I thought she was just some artsy renter. Guess we were wrong. Wrong. That word echoed in the walls more than I ever had. I'd lived here for 4 years, and in that time I'd become invisible. Familiar but not respected. The quiet one downstairs with cute furniture and eccentric taste. Now, people looked twice when I passed. Not rudely, not coldly, curiously. Even the building's longtime residents, Mr. and Mrs. Kramer in 1A, the retired music teachers, stopped me in the mailroom. We just wanted to say, Mrs. Kramer began, clutching her reusable grocery bag, that the new hallway lighting is lovely. It makes a big difference. Thank you, I smiled. I thought this place could use a little warmth. Well, you're doing a fine job, Mr. Kramer added. We always knew you had a good eye. That was the first time anyone in this building ever used the word you and knew in the same sentence. But not everyone was graceful in defeat. Vanessa, unsurprisingly, wasn't going down quietly. By Wednesday, she'd posted a passive-aggressive story on her Instagram. When your landlord is a bitter art school dropout with a paintbrush and a vendetta # eviction vibes # landlord from hell. And then she tagged me. Publicly. I saw it while eating lunch in my new rooftop studio. Barely furnished, sunlight pouring in from the cracked skylight, music playing softly from my Bluetooth speaker. I didn't react, didn't post a response, didn't screenshot it, didn't text her. Instead, I wrote a check, one that would matter. That afternoon, I made a call to the neighborhood women's shelter, a place I'd volunteered at in my 20s, helping decorate transitional apartments for women escaping domestic abuse. I'd like to start a housing fund, I told the director. Subsidize rent for women starting over. I own a small property now, just one building, but I'd like to begin there. She was stunned, then grateful. I promised her 3 units over the next year at reduced rent for vetted applicants, and I meant it. That was how I wanted to use my power. Not for show, not for revenge, but for impact. The next day, Lily texted me, "You win, hope you're happy." I didn't reply, because it was never about winning. It was about finally being free from a weight I didn't put on myself, but had carried far too long. By Friday, the building began to shift. Not just in paperwork or policy, but in energy. People started holding elevator doors for me. A young woman from Unit 4B brought me a latte. "I love what you did with the new mailboxes," she said. "And I just want to say it's cool having a female landlord. You don't see that a lot." I smiled, genuinely. Vanessa had gone silent online. Her friends no longer visited every weekend. She began packing quietly, pretending she was choosing to leave. And Lily? She moved back in with our parents. Mom never called again, which was fine. I had said all I needed to say, with deeds, not declarations. That evening, I stood on the rooftop, the skyline stretching beyond the rusted edge of the building. Same city, same air. But for the first time, a different view. I was still in my thrift store jeans, still wearing a cardigan I'd patched myself, still drinking lavender tea from a chipped mug, but I owned the ground beneath my feet. And for a woman they once dismissed as boho broke, that meant everything. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to prove, because the whispers that used to diminish me, now they carried my name with a different tone. Respect. I hung up before she could reply. For a long time, I just stood there. Not triumphant, not angry, just still. Because it wasn't joy I felt, it was clarity. For years, I had let people define me by the things I didn't have. A doctor's title, a husband, a real job, a perfect apartment. But now, I had something they couldn't control: power, boundaries, self-worth. That evening, as I watered the plants on my windowsill. I looked up at Vanessa's apartment above mine. The curtains were still drawn, but I knew she was inside, Googling rental laws, doing the math, realizing she'd have to move, or finally pay what the place was worth. And just below her, me, still in apartment 2B, still lighting my candles, still the same, yet finally seen for everything I'd become. T was a rainy Monday morning when I saw her leave. Vanessa, rolling two overstuffed suitcases down the steps of the building in 4-inch heels, her once blinding confidence dulled by the wet pavement and the weight of reality. She didn't slam the door, didn't make a scene, no dramatic goodbyes, just a quiet exit through the same front door she once thought was beneath her. I watched from my window, second floor behind gauze curtains and a steaming mug of chamomile tea. She didn't look up. Maybe she knew I was watching. Maybe she didn't. It didn't matter, because I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. Vanessa had become more than just a neighbor. She'd been the embodiment of every voice that had ever belittled me, subtle, elegant, and cutting. And now she was gone. The building felt lighter. That week, I got a handwritten note slipped under my door. Unit 3C, a woman named Eleanor I barely knew. I wanted to say thank you. You made this building feel safe again. I've lived here for 7 years, and this is the first time it feels like someone actually cares. It wasn't about new lighting or policy changes. It was about presence, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but commands respect. A few days later, I received an email from an editor at a small architecture magazine. They'd heard from one of my clients that I'd recently purchased a building and started a housing initiative. We're doing a feature on women reshaping their communities. Would you be willing to talk? My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't doing this to be celebrated. I didn't want praise. But something in me whispered, let them see a different kind of success story. So I said yes. I didn't pose in front of a marble desk or dress in power suits. They photographed me in my rooftop studio, barefoot, paint-smeared hands, surrounded by sketches and plants. The headline read, "The Quiet Landlord, How One Woman Reclaimed Her Space and Then Shared It." It went modestly viral, not millions of views, but enough. Enough that I got emails from young designers. Enough that I was invited to speak at a local women's business panel. Enough that my inbox began to fill with more design inquiries than I could handle. I started mentoring a few young women on the side, those who reminded me of myself. Hungry, underestimated, creative. I called it the Second Floor Project, because that's where I began. Apartment 2B, a life lived beneath the noise, until I owned the whole roof. And then, one evening, I saw Lily again. I was coming out of a bookstore downtown when I nearly bumped into her. She looked surprised, still perfectly dressed, still polished, but smaller. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I answered. Awkward silence. I heard about what you've been doing. With the building, the shelter thing, the magazine article." "Yeah." She looked down at her coffee, then back up. "I didn't know you were doing all that." "You never asked," I said gently. She nodded. It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't an apology. But it was enough. We said goodbye without hugging, no forced sentiment. Just two sisters, standing in the middle of a sidewalk, realizing for the first time that they were not who they used to be. That night, I returned to my apartment. Still the same string lights, same reclaimed wood table. Still quiet, but not invisible, not anymore. And as I stood in the doorway, a knock came. It was Eleanor from 3C, holding a small box. "A little housewarming gift," she smiled, for the woman who reminded us that small doesn't mean insignificant. Inside was a candle, handmade, lavender and cedarwood. She laughed softly. "It's not a joke, I promise." I smiled wider than I had in months, because once someone said my apartment smelled like poverty. Now, it smelled like purpose. 3 months passed. The building was quieter now, but not lifeless, just settled. More laughter in the stairwells, less arguing through thin walls. Plants appeared in windowsills that used to be bare. Someone even painted a mural in the laundry room, a rising sun over a city skyline. No one asked permission. I didn't need them to. Change was happening, not because I demanded it, but because I modeled it. I wasn't just collecting rent, I was creating space. It started small. A tenant in 4B, Sophia, single mom, graphic designer, knocked on my door one evening. "I heard you used to freelance," she said, shifting her weight nervously. "I'm trying to grow my business, but I've got no clue how to price my work without scaring clients away." We talked for hours. By the end, I'd helped her package her services, build a simple pitch deck, and create a system for quoting projects with confidence. A week later, she landed her first full package branding job. She brought me a bottle of wine. I brought her a lamp I had in storage. That's how it began. Word spread. By month 4, I hosted small Saturday sessions on the rooftop. Nothing fancy, just 6 or 7 women from the building and a few others from the neighborhood. We shared coffee, notebooks, and ideas. Some were artists, some were bakers. Some had nothing but an idea scribbled on a napkin. I listened, gave feedback, connected them with contacts from my design days, and I saw something bloom. Not businesses, at least not yet, but belief in themselves, in possibility, in the idea that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to wait for permission anymore. One Saturday, after a session, an older woman named Grace, widow, retired teacher from Unit 1C, stayed behind. "You know," she said, stirring honey into her tea, "I used to think power was loud. Suits, meetings, men with important watches." "Same," I smiled. "But then I watched you. You didn't storm in here. You just stayed, grew, owned it, quietly. And now we're all watching." That hit deeper than she knew. Because for years, I'd believed power wasn't for me. I thought it belonged to the polished, the pedigreed, the loud. Turns out, it also belongs to the quiet woman with calloused hands and a backbone of steel. By month 5, the city took notice. The community board invited me to speak on affordable housing innovation. I nearly said no. Public speaking still made my palms sweat. But then I remembered how small I used to feel in rooms like that. How often people assumed I was the intern or the assistant. I went. Not in heels, not in a blazer. In my usual thrifted jeans, button-up shirt, and worn boots. I shared my story. How I turned a space where I was dismissed into one where people could rise. When I finished, a young woman in the back raised her hand. "Do you think someone without connections can do what you did?" I didn't hesitate. "You don't need connections," I said. "You need clarity and courage and a refusal to believe you have to wait for someone else to validate your vision." Applause. Not thunderous, but genuine. Enough. That night I walked home through streets I once felt small in. Now, they felt different. Not because the city had changed, because I had. And when I reached my building, my home, I paused outside the front door. Someone had added a small brass plaque next to the buzzer. I hadn't approved it, but I didn't need to. It read, "The Carter Building." Quiet power lives here. I laughed, half in shock, half in awe. Vanessa would have hated it, but this wasn't for her. This was for the women like me, who grew up thinking they had to be loud to matter, or rich to lead. Turns out, you can build an empire with string lights, soy candles, and the unshakable belief that you belong. Some nights I still lit the same candles. Lavender, eucalyptus, a hint of bergamot. The scents hadn't changed, but I had. There's a strange kind of grief that comes with growth. No one tells you that. They talk about success, about rising above, about proving everyone wrong, but they don't talk about the losses that come with it. I lost my sister. Not in a tragic, tearful kind of way, but in the quiet drift that happens when two people grow in opposite directions, and only one of them notices. After our bookstore encounter, we didn't speak again. Not out of anger, just silence. She didn't reach out. Neither did I. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing her approval. I wasn't offering explanations or trying to make her see me. I was done trying to fit myself into a mold she never believed I could break. I lost the version of me who used to apologize for taking up space. The girl who dimmed her joy to keep others comfortable. The woman who decorated her apartment like a sanctuary, hoping someone, anyone, might walk in and finally say, "I see you. This is beautiful." Now I didn't need anyone to say it, because I saw it for myself. But I also gained so much. I gained neighbors who no longer looked through me, but looked to me. I gained women who brought their whole selves to my rooftop, asking questions they were once too scared to say aloud. I gained purpose that had nothing to do with proving and everything to do with pouring into others. And I gained peace. Not the kind that comes from escaping judgment, but from outgrowing it. One afternoon, I was sorting through a box of old design sketches when I found a letter. It was dated 6 years ago, folded, tucked into the sleeve of a journal I hadn't opened since my early freelance days. It was a letter I wrote to myself, back when I was barely scraping by, sleeping 4 hours a night, and wondering if I'd ever be enough. The paper was creased and smudged, but the ink still legible. Dear Madeline, one day you'll live in a place that feels like your soul. It won't be big, it won't be perfect, but it'll be yours. One day, the people who look down on you will live under your roof, whether they know it or not. And one day, you'll realize the woman you were becoming was already there. She just needed space to bloom. Don't give up. M. I sat there for a long time, holding that letter, not crying, just remembering. And then I laughed, because she was right. Every word. That evening, I walked the halls of my building. No clipboard, no agenda, just me. Checking light bulbs, saying hello to tenants, smiling at the mural in the laundry room. I passed Unit 2C, where my sister once lived. It was quiet now, rented by a young teacher named Priya. She'd painted the door a soft sage green and always left a trail of jasmine behind her. I paused for a moment, hand grazing the wall. Not out of nostalgia, but out of deep, steady gratitude. For every version of me who kept going. For every moment I stayed soft in a world that told me to harden. For every night I lit a candle, not knowing that someday it would light my path. In the end, I didn't need a billboard, or a press release, or revenge wrapped in noise. I just needed the courage to stay where I was invisible, long enough to become unforgettable. There's something poetic about endings. Not the kind that slams doors or throws punches, but the kind that exhales, softly, fully, finally. That's what this felt like. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. One night, as the city hummed outside my window, I stood in the center of my apartment, still 2B, still small, and took it all in. Same layout, same walls. But everything looked different now, because everything in me had changed. I was no longer shrinking to fit into spaces that were never built for me. No longer hoping someone would come along and tell me I'd made it. Because I knew I had. Not because of a title. Not because of how many people now knew my name. But because I finally knew who I was, even when no one was watching. I lit a candle. The same brand Vanessa once laughed at. The same scent Lily once called too earthy. But now, it wasn't poverty, it wasn't shame, it was ritual, a symbol of a woman who turned pain into purpose, silence into strength, and judgment into ownership. I thought about that day, the first time someone told me my apartment smelled like poverty, the casual cruelty, the confidence with which it was delivered, and the way it sat in my chest like smoke for days. But now I realize something they never did. It didn't matter how my apartment smelled. What mattered was who held the keys. And I did. To my home, to my building, to my life. The building was quiet that night. No more stomping heels upstairs. No more judgmental glances in the hallway. Just light behind windows. Laughter from a kitchen down the hall. Music faintly drifting from someone's speaker. Life. Real. Honest. Uncurated. I walked up to the roof one last time. The rooftop studio still had paint stains on the floor, and the plants were a little wild, but it was mine. From there, I could see the city lights flicker, the streets I used to wander with earbuds in and eyes down, afraid someone would see me and think I didn't belong. Now I stood above it, not in ego, in clarity, and I whispered to the wind, not as a prayer, but as a truth. I never needed to be loud. I just needed to stay. That's the thing about stories like mine. They don't start with grand entrances. They start with being overlooked, talked over, dismissed. But they end here, with one woman, one building, and 100 small choices made in silence. So if you're watching this, if you've ever been the quiet one, the misunderstood one, the one they said wouldn't make it because you didn't fit the box, let this be your sign. You don't have to prove anything to them. You just have to keep building, brick by brick, breath by breath, until one day you look up and realize you own everything they thought you'd beg for. And when they whisper, let them. Because when you build in silence, your legacy will speak louder than they ever did.